Good evening, everyone. This is Dawn. Thank you for joining this webinar brought to you by ASQ Innovation Division. The topic of tonight's webinar is Sustaining Change, Busting Change Management Myths. As quality professionals, we are often called upon to implement change, whether it is a design, measure, analyze, improve, control project, or a corporate initiative. We need to understand the dynamics of change to assist in achieving improvement and strategic goals. Sustaining change is elusive. Are we to be guided by common change management means? For example, it is enough if we have a communication plan or are assigned a change resource. Change is soft, intangible, yet we need tangible results. Our leader is charismatic, so everyone will follow. Do we need to consider change management if the change is small? The learning objectives are gain insights on 5 elements for sustaining change, bust the myths associated with those elements, take away some practical approaches to help you achieve and sustain change. Please note that this webinar is recorded and the recording will be available on ASQ Innovation Division YouTube channel. There will be 5 to 10 minutes time after the presentation for questions and answers. Please post your questions on the Q&A section of the WebEx tool. Tonight our speaker is Mrs. Wanda Storm. Thank you, Wanda, thank you very much for accepting to be our speaker tonight. Wanda Storm is a progressive leader with 30 years of experience across the energy, financial, and high-tech sectors. She has an MBA, is a Master Black Belt, holds certificates in change management, coaching, system thinking, and performance management. Storm served on the Malcolm Baldrige National Quality Award Board of Examiners 2008-2010. Is the immediate past chair of ASQ Human Development and Leadership Division and currently the facilitator for the Technical Communities Group number 2. She is currently employed as a consultant in the energy sector. Now I would like to hand over to Wanda Storm. Wanda, please take it away.
Thank you, Dawn, so much. I want to thank you and the Innovation Division for having me here today. And what I hope for everyone that's involved in this call is that you can take away either one new learning or one reinforcement or reminder for you around sustaining change. So you would think that by now we would no longer have to talk about change management, that everyone would realize there is a people component to all changes that take place, not only in the workplace, but in our everyday life. But you can see a few different examples listed on this slide. And maybe you have noticed additional complexity in your workplace or potentially the pace of change. As I think about it with the advancement of technology, you know, quickly one feature is outdated before we actually have it fully integrated into your activity. Another reason is very personal to you on this webinar, and that is the whole call for innovation, right? So we have a whole division around innovation, and that call for that actually indicates there's going to have to be some change associated with it. I know that it's a focus for companies in which I interact, and also not only ASQ, but there's other organizations out there who have innovation as a key focus area as well. There's always the need for improving processes, and with each process improvement, there comes a change in behavior that's required by the people that are actually executing that process. But you know what? There's no need for you to be dismayed about all of this, because as a quality professional, you really have the skills that it takes. You have what it takes, those right qualities to manage and lead change. And some of those qualities or skills required are systems thinking, seeing that cause and effect and the impact that processes have on each other, and being able to step back and look at those interactions and the impacts to make sure the change won't create conflicting focus areas. You also have group facilitation skills. These are critical to enabling others to become aware, to understand, to begin to adopt, and finally to be able to internalize the change that's taking place. You can effectively guide others to navigate the change, and you have that ability to discern the intended from the unintended consequences. Using your systems thinking skill and insight, you can begin to identify any potential unintended consequences, and you can determine what's helping or hindering the change to actually take place. As a quality professional, you're in a position to be able to step back and see that bigger picture and understand not only what's desired, but what other fallout there could potentially be from this change. So let me share an example with you. One example would be that we are trying to implement a change at work, and right now we have had several attempts at trying to implement this one new process, and we've had a lot of pushback to it. Associated with it is quite a bit of change, and that's one of the reasons that we keep having this. So as I step back and look at the bigger picture and trying to understand what is causing some of this angst around being able to do this, a lot of it has to do with general pushback that you may receive because people are extremely busy, they have a lot on their plate, they're not sure they want one more thing to do differently. But as the person focused on the change with this project, one of the things I'm trying to do is use my facilitation skills to be able to help bring people together and have a conversation about what's really changing. And so whereas typically you would say, oh, well, there's just going to be a few changes and we're going to train you how to do this, what you don't want to do is leave people at that point where they really haven't begun to internalize the specific behaviors. So with this particular change that we're talking about, we're going to do an assessment to see really where are they in their organization, how much leadership support do we really have to affect this change? Do we have a clear plan about how we're going to implement it? So I'm able to put together several different skills, stepping back and looking at what else is going on in their business right now. How can this tie in to have a positive cause and effect for their business at this particular point? So that's one of the things that you can do. As a quality professional, step back, look at what is the bigger picture, look at what's intended versus unintended. The intent is to have people to be able to do their work more effectively. An unintended consequence of that could be that at first it's going to take them a little longer to be able to do it because they've got the learning curve. So how can we minimize that learning curve? What can we do for them to get them on board quicker and faster so that they can begin to take ownership of this particular change? I'll let you guys know how that turns out. We are still facing ongoing challenges with that particular project. One skill effectively displayed by quality professionals is collaboration. And for change to be most effective, there needs to be thought given to who makes up those involved in executing the change and ensure they are representative of the change landscape. So that's kind of what I was talking about in terms of getting the right people together, trying to determine what kind of changes are coming and what kind of people do we need to be involved. So some of those people that are involved in this and that you want to be sure help make up the change team that you're working with are people who are the actual workers, the actual tactical experts, those who know what's going on day-to-day in the day-to-day work. You also want to involve your facilitators or managers that are associated or impacted by the change. You want to be sure that creative people are there to assist with communication, to assist with engagement, and to help the change stick, and very importantly, the strategic specialists or the executives who are going to sponsor the change in the organization. These are all critical people that can help you as a quality professional bring together the right people as you're trying to make improvements in your organization to understand what is the people side of that and what specifically is changing for them. How can you be creative in delivery of the content so that it's more inviting to people to want to be a part of? How do you get your managers on board, and how do you get your executives there to really help sponsor you? So even though you may have all of these people in place, change can still have some negative impact. And, you know, you have in place a well-developed change plan. Even though you have that, you can still have anxiety around it. And those of us that are focused on change as our key roles, you know, I find it's real interesting. It's like having a group of facilitators to facilitate. They're very difficult to facilitate, right, because everyone knows how. It's the same thing with change. Those of us who have change as a key role, we don't like having change done to us, just like everyone else out there doesn't like it having change done to them. So that's real important to remember. Be sure to look at it through your eyes of a change. What if this was a change that you were having to go through? Are you providing the appropriate and the intentional communications? Are you targeting your communications in a way that can really let people know and understand what the change is about? Are you working to reduce any conflicts and confusion? A lot of times, people will make assumptions and think they understand things. It's very important to get out there and have conversation with people and try to reduce the confusion associated with changes. I don't know if any of you have noticed, but many times when there's a large change coming, especially like an organizational change where they're changing the structure of the organization, or they're putting in different project teams and they're changing the membership of the project teams, those type things, there's a lot of confusion and there's a lot of lost productivity around that until people are in place and until people understand what's going to happen. It's difficult with change, but what you want to try to do is minimize some of that confusion so that people can still be somewhat productive. Is there some way that you can go about connecting why we're making this change and why we're doing it and how it's impacting the future? Those different questions are different things to consider as you embark on a change journey. And, you know, it really is a journey. It's really not an event. So a lot of times people say, okay, I got a change plan. I've communicated. I've told them that we're changing. Okay, you know, dust your hands off. It's done, right? No, it isn't an event like that. It really is a journey to actually make the change that you need to. So why is that we still have some of those issues? It's because of different things that take place. And John Cotter, he is one of the key gurus in organizational change. And you would think, based on everything that we know, that change has to be effective, right? So why in the world is it not effective? And these are some reasons why. And he indicates that change is ineffective because we allow complacency and we do not bring the right people together. If you think about the team we talked about a couple of slides back, the different types of people to have on your team, if you don't have those people in place to help guide the change and ensuring that there's a vision and remembering to connect to the future, you're going to have an issue. Under communication is always a possibility. You need to always remember, and you know, this has been going on for years. At the beginning, she told you I had 30 years of experience, and I wince every time I hear that. I think I'm still only in my 30s. How can I have 30 years of experience? But that's not true. So under communication is always a possibility, and you need to remember to communicate, 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 and then communicate some more. And I've been told that since I started working in the 1980s. And so be sure to claim the short-term wins. Noting those really helps changing begin to become real for people. They can begin to see a benefit from the change if you hit the short-term wins and you share those with others. You want to identify and remove any barriers and obstacles that stand in the way, and very importantly, as Cotter says here, you know, it's terrible to declare victory too soon. And we're going to talk about that in a little, with one of the myths we're going to talk about that is just because you've trained people doesn't mean that, okay, change was a success. If they don't actually apply the training that they've been provided, then there's not very much change that's taken place. An example of this is a lot of times we'll do pilots as well, and we'll say when the pilot's finished, okay, it's a win, it's a short-term win that should be celebrated, but don't forego doing all that you did in that particular win for the next set of implementations. Another problem with implementing change is if you're doing it in waves, after you do it one time, as the change leader for it, you're used to it. So it's like you feel like you're being repetitive. Well, it's repetitive to you, but it's not repetitive to the new group of people that you're working with. So you really need to start with those people where they are and really bring to bear the full force of the change plan to help them make that transition, just as you help the people in the short term do the same thing. So on the team, many times we forget that we're so entrenched with the change and we don't, really consider that new. And so that's what I was trying to say just now is don't be so entrenched in the change and you seeing it from your perspective that you forget to look at it from the people who are actually having to change from their perspective. Another key area is really understanding the culture in which you're actually implementing the change. This I cannot stress enough. The culture in one organization is certainly not the same in another. In large organizations, it's different from group to group. It may be different from team to team. And you really need to understand the culture in which you're trying to apply this. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at 5 elements to sustain change. And, as we prepared this workshop and as I looked into creating this webinar from the material, we had discovered many different similarities among the different change gurus out there. And while there are actually others beyond 5, we found these 5 to be absolutely critical for all types of changes, whether organizational or individual or really anywhere in between. So let's look at these 5 elements to sustain change. So you have where you are today, and you need a clear direction. What you really want to do is understand your current state and where you want to move to for that sustained change, or what your change state's going to look like. Where is it that you really want to go? In terms of clear direction, do you have a vision? Can you succinctly describe that vision? Have you spent some time to create a vision statement that can be effectively communicated? That really kind of brings us to the second element, which is planning and communication. Planning and communication, you need to be clear in your direction. Where are you going? You need your plan to help you get you there, and you need to be able to communicate your plan and your direction effectively and efficiently to those that are going to be receiving the message. So that clear direction is key up front. Planning your change is critical, and communicating your change is critical. I would say, okay, so it sounds like all these things are critical, and yes, they are, because these are the 5 top elements to sustain change. The third one, I would say, without this, you can have a vision and you can have planning and communication, but if you do not have sponsorship, then I would tell you that you're most likely not going to succeed. We're going to talk about sponsorship in a little bit more detail, and I'm going to give you a real-life example of something that I've been through recently that really tells you how important sponsorship really is to a project. The next one is to install and realize. The difference here, and we're going to talk about it more in terms of the myths surrounding it, is that installation is about the introduction and realization is about achieving the goal. So just keep that in mind. And then our 5th one is reinforcement, and it comes in many different forms, and we're going to talk about how critical reinforcement of the desired behaviors are to sustain change. And so when you have those 5 elements all working together from your current place to where you're trying to go to, you should be able to sustain change. So with that, each of these elements, we came up with a myth that we briefly would like to walk through with you. And the myths are these. The vision, the goals, and intent are static. You may have heard that before. What you set a vision or what you set your goals, They're in concrete. That's what you're doing. Change plans are only for big changes. Charismatic leaders are key. Change planning ends when the change is installed, and change is hard. So those are the myths that we're going to talk about. And I have a couple of slides on each one, and then we'll finish it up, and then we'll have some time, hopefully, for some questions. So myth one, the vision, goals, and intent are static. Static, well, I'd say not hardly. And I would say that because your change plans are going to have to adjust as your project or your initiative adjusts. So I've only listed out 3 potential examples here. And one of those is change in sponsorship. One is change in the external environment, and that could be prices, sanctions, regulations. It could be a change in organizational structure. The impacts can be significant or minor, but it's going to require updates to both your change plan and your communication plan. So remember, when we said we had a vision and then we had planning and communication were the second things. They work hand in hand. And so in order to bust this myth, so to speak, is we need to think about in terms of what happens when there are adjustments to your strategy or to your goals that you're trying to reach with your project. I'm sure many of you have heard the term scope creep before, and that happens with projects a lot. You start out, you've got a really clear, defined scope on your project, and it keeps getting larger and larger until you're trying to solve world hunger, and then you have to bring it back. The problem is as that scope is growing, you're having to change your plans, all of your plans associated with that, and you're going to need to change your change plans as well. So I think it's real important to keep in mind that if you have a change in any of these things that are listed here or other potential changes to the project or the initiative, then it's going to require change to your change plan and to your communication. So in terms of your change plans, you want to try to come up with some deliverables by phase. There is a supplement to this presentation, and I'm not going to be able to go through all the tools that we shared in the workshop with this, but I am going to leave those with you. But there is a way to look at the change plans by phase, and then what you're going to have to do is have ongoing updates to your sponsor plan, your stakeholder engagement, to your communication, and to any readiness assessments that are being conducted. And so if you have any questions about any of those types of documents, then I can be sure and share some of that with you. In addition, communication plans are critical, and you're going to need to adjust your communication plans to be able to keep up with your vision and your goals. And so you want to always be clear about what is the purpose of your communication, what's your key message and content, who's the audience that you're trying to reach, what media are you going to use, how are you going to deliver it, and what kind of feedback are you going to collect, and how are you going to collect that feedback. So this is a way to help you bust that myth that everything's static. You need to be able to refresh and keep up with what's going on. One example that I'll give you on stakeholder engagements is that as you begin to engage with your audience that's being impacted by your change, then as you learn more about what the change is actually involving. So say that you're improving a process, and as far as you know, there's pretty much one organization that's the recipient of the output of that process, but as you go through it, you begin to understand that there are offshoots from that process that deliver other pieces of information to other teams. So your stakeholder list grows. So as you understand more and more about what changes are taking place, you want to update your stakeholder engagements and who you're engaging with to make sure that they know what's going on with your change and how it may potentially impact them. So let's look at myth number 2. And myth number 2 is change plans are only for the big change. So the question here is your change actually transformational? So the thing about it is, it's regardless of the size of your project or the type of change, you need a plan to assist with it, but it doesn't have to be the same for every project. I know in the change management world, there are, I don't know how many different tools available. It doesn't mean you need to use every tool out there for every change that takes place. You need to do a fit for purpose, so do what's right for your particular project, your particular initiative, and the culture which you're working. So is your change actually transformational? I wish I could ask you why you still need to use the change tools if it's not transformational, but since I can't do that, I'm hoping that coming to mind for you is the fact that you're going to be asking people to do something different than they currently do. Now, it may be a very small change, but thinking through how you're going to communicate that with them. How are you going to engage them to have clarity? And how are you going to share knowledge about the change that's going to be critical to success? I'm sure that you can think of a lot of different other reasons and different ways that you could address the different types of change that you have. We do have a simple tool to show you that will determine your level of change, and that's on this next slide. And we've just put together a scale from the left to the right, and you would select within the boxes in between where on the continuum do you think your particular project or initiative falls. So is it just a current state improvement, or are you really doing some type of future state design? Looking down a little further, is the solution familiar, but it's just something better, so you've just improved something a little? Or is it going to be an untested solution and there's no experience with it? You know, is it a minor disruption to your business, or is it a major disruption? Somewhere along that continuum. And then what you would do is you would look at where your initiative actually falls on this and see, oh, do I need to be more transformative, or do I need more non-transformative tools to help me? But what you don't want to do is, if you've got many people who have the skills and desire to change, you don't want to, you know, do everything you would do if you only had a few people who have the skills and the desire to change. Your whole training plan and your whole approach to the people impacted is going to be differently if people have the skills and if people do not have the skills. So that's one good way to kind of judge it, is look along and, you know, use this as you're identifying your change and how large is your change that you're actually going to go through. Is it transformational, or is it non-transformative? So myth number 3 is that charismatic leaders are key. So, you know, I had a great opportunity. I worked at GE, and I worked there when Jack Welch was there, and I found him to be a charismatic leader. But I also found that he built a sense of responsibility in his GE leaders. And I know not everybody likes his leadership style, and not everybody, you know, is 100% gung-ho on Jack. But I had the opportunity to actually meet him in person a couple of times, and I tell you, it was a great experience because he knew the business. He could look at me and talk about the business that I was from, what my role was, what I was doing there, and it was the first time he had ever met me, and he wasn't just meeting with our group. And so it was very interesting to me that even though he was charismatic, when I left there, I had a deeper sense of responsibility to deliver on some key things that we were focused on for that year. I think that you really need a responsible leader, whether they're charismatic or not. If you have someone that will stay the course with you over the lifespan of your change initiative, that is worth more than I can tell you. Someone that's going to invest all the resources that are needed. time, energy, money, somebody that's going to reject short-term benefits that are inconsistent with the overall strategy for goal achievement. You know, it's not just about getting something quick and getting it on the board. You do want those if it can work, but you don't want to sacrifice for the long-term goal achievement. I think another thing that's real important is standing fast in the face of adversity, remaining determined and focused on the desired goal. Having a sponsor that will do that. They will break down barriers. They will run interference for you when it's needed. And I think it's really important to have that in a sponsor, if at all possible, to ensure that they are engaged. And that brings us to our next part of charismatic leaders, is engage beats charismatic. So if you can have an engaged sponsor, that is absolutely important as well. Not only responsible, but engaged. They're a partner with you. It's very clear what success is going to look like. They're going to meet with you regularly. They want to hear the bad news, and they want to help mitigate that, and they want to participate in any risk evaluation and updates, and in the face of communication. So I want to give you an example here of we had a sponsor, and we were talking about key changes to your vision and mission and things like that. We actually had a sponsor that was real engaged with us on a project, and we were going down one path, and lo and behold, he decided to retire. And when he retired, the person that they replaced him with as the sponsor had a very different perspective on how he wanted the project to move forward. And instead of going through a structured project management process that we were doing to execute this new work process and supporting technology tool software, he decided that we should just stop all the communication and stop all of the going out and interacting with the units that we were going to provide this to, and that we should do it on a pull basis and just tell them based on what they know today, do they want it. And we have had some very difficult times by the sponsor changing the tactics. That is a tactic that a sponsor can use to have more of a pull versus a push system, and that works great in some instances. I think it gets back to knowing the culture and the culture in which you're working in. And when someone comes new into your organization and is taking on the role of sponsor for a project, sometimes it's difficult to have them get on board with what your approach has been, because that's what the person before them did. So you know, I've had some great change challenges recently in my role, and it's been very good to see that and to see how different things play out. Similarly, on another project, at the same time, we had another change in sponsorship, and the sponsor that came in was very much of like mind of the sponsor that left, that she just went to a different position, and a new sponsor came in, but is very much on board and has shifted somewhat how we're approaching things, but is very adamant about the change aspect of this and making sure that we have clear communication and we have great engagement with our stakeholders. So it's very different. Your sponsor can help build the culture that you have in your projects. And not to say that either one is right or wrong, but to tell you that it's difficult to change midstream when you've been going one way and you've got momentum and you have to kind of come to a screeching halt and change things. That's where, being as the change manager, things are being changed for you. You have to deal with the change just like you're having to help others deal with a different type of change. So I hope that helps a little bit to know that it's not all fun and games, but there are these different things that we have to meet with, and we can overcome them, certainly. Our fourth myth is the change plan ends when the change is installed. This actually comes from Daryl Connor's work. I mentioned John Cotter earlier. Daryl Connor is another one. And this is a key concept, because if you think about it, the myth is once the change is installed, then you're done with change. And that's just false. You know, it's very important, as we were talking earlier, you don't only want to hand off something to the business that you're providing the change for. You don't want to just deliver the training. You don't want to just give them a bunch of templates. You don't want to just say, okay, cool, this is the way it's going to be done now, see you around. What you really want to do is if you want that sustained change, then you're going to need to have that realization that you've actually accomplished the purpose. The change is a piece of it, but the purpose is what you're trying to get to. You're trying to get to that business result, and that's what's most important. If you think about it in terms of, you guys are focused on innovation. If you think about it in terms of innovation, you don't want to go out and introduce an idea to people and say, okay, here, this is a great idea, hope it works for you. You want to be sure that that idea, that innovation that you come up with can actually deliver some type of business results that's being anticipated and needed for that organization. And so that's where this is very important, is that it's not only putting into place the changes that you need, it's not only installing them, but it's also waiting around and being there for that realization. It's really helping it to become implemented and inculcated into how that business is going to operate going forward. So to help you with that, there is a checklist here, and it's a little confusing, but I'll share it with you. It's green, yellow, red for those people that have issues with colors. It's low, medium, high. High is on the right-hand side. You want the ones that are not in the box to be high, and you want the ones that are in the box in the middle to be green or low, okay? So this is something that you can do with your sponsor. If you could sit down and have a conversation with your sponsor every so often and go through, you know, is the sponsorship effective? You know, are data needed to make course-changing decisions regarding the change in place, and are you actually utilizing it? Is the culture aligned with what's needed to change? Is the team managing the connections among your portfolio of projects? So, you know, those are questions that you want to get those high responses to, and then you want to look at what's that level of resistance due to willingness to change, due to the ability to change, and what's the level of change saturation going on in your business. You really don't want to be implementing another change if you have a high level of change saturation going on. That is really a prescription for disaster, so to speak. So it would be good not to have a lot of change saturation, but to be able to focus on the specific changes as they're coming along. So our last myth, you know, we talked about change being hard, and we talked about reinforcement. And so reinforcement's what you need. So why it isn't hard is because there's a lot going for you to help make change happen. So if we were in the workshop, what I would have you do is be talking about, you know, what type of change you're dealing with and what are some forces that are in place to actually help you. And you can create actually a force field analysis, what's helping you, what's standing in your way. There was a Harvard Business Review article that talked about this, and, you know, we can sometimes make change hard just by using those words. Oh, we'd love to do this change, but oh, it's going to be so hard. The concept is to turn it around with what we can say positively about what's helping us to make this change. And what have we done before that has been successful and that this change has this in common with it? And so we could actually come up with some positive things about why the change is really good, and it really isn't difficult to help make this happen. And the other thing that you can do is, remember we were talking about having a vision, but it's very easy to sit down and write like a positive elevator speech about the change process. So let me just, I'm going to give you a quick example. We're enabling you to have better quality data at your fingertips in one place. In this edition, you will be able to see a diagram and graphs that display the data. This change will enable you to make better and quicker decisions because you're not having to search for important data. We realize how frustrating it is not to have the needed information timely and accurately and are working to eliminate that frustration. So in that statement, we tried to keep it simple. What's unexpected is that, oh, you're going to be able to see some things that you haven't been able to see before. You're going to be able to make some better decisions and some quicker decisions because you're not having to search around in a lot of different places. So there's credible data that's available to you. And the emotional aspect, we know it's frustrating right now because you can't do it, and we're working to eliminate that frustration. So this is actually one of the projects that I'm working on is this one, and so I'm going to have a chance to try this out on more than one occasion with different groups of people as we project this further in the business. So the last slide I have is on lessons learned. And Dawn, how are we doing on time?
Yes, we are.
Are we good?
Yes, we are very good, yes.
Okay. All right, so on the lessons learned, our benchmarking studies have given key lessons, and it's very interesting. And when I look at the benchmarking studies that are out there, they really help bust these myths as well. And this is really more from the change practitioner standpoint as well. And so it's saying that planning is critically important, sponsorship, but a couple of things that weren't mentioned in our list of myths were to integrate change early in a project and educate the team and others on change. So I just want to give you a few personal examples of doing that and why it's important. So that whole development and update to change plans, I believe we talked about earlier, and I did give you an example where we have had to constantly update our plans because of changes associated with different functionality of the tool that we're delivering, but also because there's been changes in sponsorship and changes in stakeholder groups that we're going to be interfacing with. And so because of that, we've had to constantly update our change plans. Ensuring the sponsor is engaged not only with the project. And one great example of this is having a sponsor that is at kickoff meetings and is engaged with setting up the change aspect for their particular organization. It's critical to have them stand in front of their people and say that this is an important change that's coming. And their expectation is that, you know, managers and employees alike are going to work with the team to implement these particular change things that are taking place. If they can be engaged and communicate in their own words, that is so much more meaningful than doing canned things for them. And so having that sponsor engagement, I cannot tell you again, it's extremely critical. Integrating change early in a project. I can't tell you how many projects I've been, so we work with a five-phase project management approach in the company where I'm working, and you know, it's amazing to me how many times in phase 4 you get called and says, oh, we need to do change now. Well, phase 4 is at the point of implementation. And so it's like they did nothing prior to that to prepare for the change, but now all of a sudden, because they figured out all the changes and they're ready to implement it, they want a change person to come and just say, okay, yep, let's just go do this, and people are going to love it. So it's much better if you can get involved early on to really understand the project or the initiative from the beginning, from the scoping, and make sure that you have some participation in the scoping boundaries and being able to look at how many different behaviors is that really going to impact so that you can identify those key critical behaviors that are important to making that change be sustainable over time. And then the last one is educate the team and others on change. And this is something that I discovered, that even though an organization may have a change organization within it, they may have it as a key practice that they have in their organization. They may have groups named change management or change leadership or things like that. It doesn't mean that everyone in the organization understands what change is. And any of you that work with projects or work a lot with information technology or some other type project approaches, you'll know there is a whole thing called management of change. And then this is change management. And so those get very often confused. And so when we're talking about management of change, we're talking about changing a specific aspect to your project. So it goes through a rigorous process of understanding what that change is, what the impact is to time and cost, and trying to make sure that there's clarity around what resources are impacted, et cetera, et cetera. So with this, we're talking specifically about the people change, the behavioral change that's associated with taking on and executing a new process, executing a project step, executing day-to-day work, being able to deal with a change in the organizational structure, in the way that we're going to approach our customers. I mean, all of that is changes in behaviors that are going to have to be updated and understood by the people that are part of your organization. And so I can't, speak to that enough, is don't assume others understand it. I've put together just a basic presentation on change. Here's what change is, here's what it isn't. This is what I'm focused on, is on the behavioral aspect of people change. And there is, anytime there is a change to something physical that people participate in, they are going to go through some type of behavioral change associated with being able to operate the new physical piece of it. So with that, I think we have time for some questions.
Thank you very much, Wanda, again for your presentation. You can post your questions in the Q&A section of the WebEx tool. I should remind you that you can find the recording of this webinar on ASQ Innovation Division YouTube channel. We have 5 to 10 minutes for questions and answers, and you can post your questions in the Q&A section of the WebEx tool.
So one thing I'll just mention while you're writing any questions you have is this was prepared by Carolyn Wolfgang, Marilyn Monda, and myself, and we did a workshop at ASQ, at WCQI last year in Seattle. And so they are very knowledgeable in this area as well. I was very happy to present this to you guys, but this is our material, and we did it collectively, and so you can reach out to any of us, and we'll be happy to work with you.
Thank you very much, Wanda. The first question that has been posted, what tips do you have for implementing change management in a fast-moving startup endeavor?
So that is a great question. It's also a very difficult question to answer, but I will tell you I'm in the process of learning how to apply this with the Agile methodology, which I think is somewhat quick because it has those quick sprint cycles. So with a startup organization, it's going to be, I think just some of the basics is what you're going to need. So you're going to need just some of the, how is everyone going to work together? When you start looking at change, because things are changing very rapidly, how quickly do people adapt to that change? And so you can do some work in terms of, I would do some type of team analysis to just understand how people prefer to work and get along, and then use that in terms of change to be able to identify people that need or prefer to have longer times to think through information. Be sure you get the information to them in a way that they have time to process it before you're asking them to implement the next round. and make sure that for people that, you know, think on their feet very quick, but sometimes they're too quick to act, is how can you help them slow their pace so that they can move timely with you but not try to get ahead too far, if that makes any sense. I'm not sure that's answering your question, but I would say that with each Agile sprint that we've talked about so far, as I understand it, the change plan is supposed to identify, are there any changes associated with this particular sprint? If so, what are they? How am I going to help them make that transition till we get to the next sprint? And considering at least hours are 2 weeks long, that's a pretty short amount of time to get people to make behavioral change. So it's a learning experience for me, and I'm still working on it. If you've got any brilliant ideas, I would love to have them, because I, you know, am up against this as well. And I don't think I answered your question, but that's a little bit of tips I've got.
Thank you very much. We still have few minutes for questions and answers. You can post your questions in the Q&A section of the WebEx tool. So another question is, do you treat changes for internal workforce differently from change for external customers?
So internal versus external customers? Was that the question?
Internal workforce from change for external customers.
So you would typically go through the same steps. I think what would be different about it, and most all of mine is inside a company, so it's internal change. For changes that we've done, that I've worked with salespeople for connection to the people that they're selling to, it was more to understand what type of changes were impacting the organizations that they were selling to, so that they could incorporate into their thinking for their sales model that they were using. But I would say that you're still going to need a plan, you're still going to need a sponsor, you're still going to need to have appropriate communication and being clear about what that is. You're going to need to have the ability to determine when it's installed and when it's realized, and you're going to need some type of reinforcement, whether it's internal or external. So some way to help it be not hard for them, some way to help them make that transition over. So you're going to still need those 5 things. They're going to be important regardless. I think the way that that you look at it is you're going to approach your stakeholder engagement a bit differently externally than you are internally, and I think your communications are going to be different. I think also whatever form of recognition you use is going to be different with the external folks.
Thank you. Reminding you that you can find a recording of this webinar on ASQ Innovation Division YouTube channel.
So these are the backup slides that are available. And it's just a little more information that you can use. That's really the tools that we actually have people work through using them. If you don't have any other questions, then I would say
no,
that.
There is, yes.
Oh, you do? Okay.
No, there is no more questions, actually.
Okay. I really appreciate you guys letting me be here. I think the Innovation Division is an excellent division. I'm excited about what you guys are doing. I hope this helps you just a little bit as you face different changes going on, even as you face, as a new division in ASQ, putting this into practice for your division. I mean, I think change is important as well. And we're certainly going through change at ASQ, so it's another way to apply it. I think there's just a lot of change going on in the world today, and there's lots of opportunity to apply the concepts. So, like I said, you don't have to use every tool that's out there, but use it as a reminder, and happy change.
Thank you so much, Wanda, for accepting to be our speaker for Innovation Division members. Really appreciate that. And I think there is no more questions, so we can end this webinar event. Thank you all again for joining this webinar, and have a good night.